Hello and welcome to another retrospective episode of the Nothing Ventured pod. And in true juxtapositional and contrarian style, in this retrospective, we are going to be talking about the future. I was really lucky to have a couple of guests on the podcast that are really thinking hard about what the future of tech and innovation and essentially humanity looks like. So in today's episode, you're going to hear from Theo Preistley, a futurist, international speaker, and co-author of the book The Future Starts Now, and Alex Mann, partner at TimeChain, who is incredibly enthusiastic and bullish about the future of Bitcoin and the need for digital currency in a world gone mad. I hope you love this episode. Let's get straight into it. Yes, I agree that taking a plane is far more efficient for me personally than getting on a kayak, but it equally has an impact on climate, on resources, etc., right? And all of which are finite, at least in terms of planetary resources, right? Extraplanetary resources we don't know, and this is why people are looking to, get to Mars and so on and so forth. So how do you kind of reconcile the fact? So I would agree that consumption is a sign of progress. For me, at the very least, it doesn't feel that consumption is necessarily the goal, because we're seeing in the West that, as overly consumptive sort of civilizations, we are actually we're having second and third order effects, whether it's around health, whether it's around climate change, etc. So surely if proponents of Bitcoin and Bitcoin itself is to be sort of the de facto standard potentially, then to your point, managing that consumption efficiently has to be key, because it is something that a lot of people are concerned about, not just with Bitcoin, but just in general anyway, right?
I think it depends what you're referring to consumption of. If it's consumption of energy, then I think we can address that point with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a non-rivalrous energy demander. Mm-hmm. It doesn't compete.
It's not taking it from anything else.
It's not because you can't just plug a Bitcoin miner into your house and it just wouldn't be profitable. You'd be losing money. You have to look for lower cost sources of energy. Mm-hmm. So essentially the Bitcoin network incentivizes a global hunt for the lowest cost source of energy 24/7. Mm-hmm. And that has interesting second and third order consequences on human civilization, human society. I'll give you one. So let's say we're concerned about climate change and we want to incentivize the production and rollout of green energy. Green energy, in particular solar and wind, have very specific problems that make it challenging to run a modern industrial society. Namely, that they produce energy in an intermittent fashion. Mm-hmm. So you get loads of energy when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, and none otherwise. Mm-hmm. And so you wouldn't want to power a baby incubator, for example, on wind power. You need steady power. And so when you have loads of excess energy, it's not actually cost efficient to store it in a battery, because the battery will bleed after 24 hours. Mm-hmm. And batteries are really expensive. And so you end up having a load of energy that you can't do anything with. You can't put it into the grid because then you get brownouts. And so that energy typically just gets wasted. Mm. But because the Bitcoin network is a 24/7 willing buyer of energy, these renewable energy producers can sell their excess energy to the Bitcoin network,
in turn making them more efficient and therefore more profitable and therefore more viable.
You improve the marginal economics of renewable energy stations globally.
As a futurist, you're also always thinking about convergence. So can you share more about what that means to you, what the concept means, and how it influences your predictions and your thinking about the future, especially around metaverse, Web3, and AI?
Yeah, sure. So, a lot of the time I see people reporting on particular trends and they treat it as a separate thing, as a silo, and they don't connect dots to other trends and how it works. That's just the way my head has worked for a number of years. It's just a tangled bag of wires, and in there is a cat, and every so often the cat drags something out and there's like 3 or 4 wires attached to each other. And I'd just come back from Thailand talking about banking, and again trying to relate banking towards Web3, metaverse, and AI, and of course they've all been treated as separate trends. So we've got the DeFi trend, we've got the metaverse trend, which they tried and failed at. And we've now got artificial intelligence seeping into the banking infrastructure in the front, middle, and back office. And there's a report. There's like 54% or something of banking functions and processes are likely to be disrupted or removed as a result of AI. But I see the confluence of several trends sort of coming together, because if you look at decentralization, for example, and I wrote a quick blog because I had this sort of thought around how do you tell people what this confluence looks like, or this convergence looks like, and I likened it to an orchestra. So if you think about the metaverse or spatial computing as the actual orchestra hall or the concert hall, and in there you've got the actual orchestra itself. Now the orchestra is made up of different components. You've got the woodwind section, the brass, the drums, etc., etc. And that's kind of like Web3 or decentralization, because in a sense it's all decentralized parts of the orchestra. When it comes together, it works together. But in their own right, they are decentralized because they have their own function. They make their own sounds, and that sound is data. And AI is the conductor, bringing it all together and making sure that the data all works together in the right way, and it harmonizes everything. And that's how I kind of liken these three particular trends, which is, we have the metaverse and spatial computing, which is now going to be like a new paradigm. And it is different layers of reality. So you have virtual reality, augmented reality, or extended or mixed, however you want to call it. You've got physical reality, which we live in today. The existing web, which is just flat. You have the metaverse, which can be 2D or 3D. And you as a person should be able to interact in any number of these at the same time. And how does that work? Well, you have to have something that orchestrates these layers, which is AI. But how do you protect your identity and your sovereign data and everything? Well, that's Web3. That's decentralization. Yeah. So that's how I see the makeup of the world coming forward from that. But of course, there's far too many people going, oh, we've got Web3 and DeFi and decentralization and blockchain and crypto, and that's just one thing, and never the twain shall meet with the other ones. So I think it's time to start bringing some of these trends together, and even the older ones like cloud and big data and analytics and stuff like that.
You said that with such a sneer in your voice as you said cloud. It just felt like yeah.
Yeah, I mean, having lived through some of these older trends as well and reporting on them and stuff, and nobody talks about these trends anymore because they're now, they're taken as read, they're adopted. Yeah. And I want to get to that point where we have, decentralized technologies along with everything else that we have, and nobody talks about it. I wrote something today, which is, blockchain is the most boring infrastructure technology it is, but let it be boring, and because boring can be successful. But far too many people put blockchain at the top of the marketing material or the selling plot point. And it's like saying, yeah, our business runs on Excel. Yes, Excel, here we go. And it's like, nobody cares. What are you giving me that I can use to be useful? And we've kind of lost that with the modern trends.
So I think there's a couple of really interesting things there. I mean, again, as I mentioned earlier, our last guest, actually actively suggests that blockchain is a complete scam and just a marketing facade and actually has zero value. I think there are almost certainly people that will argue with him about that, but I can see where he's sort of coming from, because in a lot of conversations I've had with a number of people, both within and outside the technology sector, the question always arises: this thing that has been built on the blockchain, what was stopping you from building it on traditional Web 2 technology or in a traditional database? And often there is no answer, no real differentiating answer that comes back. But the thing that struck me, I think, most when you were speaking, it's that whole thing about when does a trend become normality, right? And it's about when that technology becomes so inherently part of your day-to-day life that you don't notice it anymore, right? At the moment, you've got people shouting about these things, exactly as you said. You've got all the people saying, wow, crypto is the future, and then AI is the future, and something else in the future, quantum computing or whatever it might be. But actually, it becomes a future when you don't even know that it's happening, right? And if I think about artificial intelligence, just as a very simple example in the credit card industry, people do not realize that essentially their credit card fraud systems is essentially a pattern matching AI. Whereas previously it was, if your card was used in Canada, flag it as a fraudulent transaction. Literally, that's what they used to do back in whatever the 80s or 90s, right? So at the point where these technologies are just second nature in the technology we're already using, I think that's when people, when they stop becoming a trend. And I think this is the point. I think people are trying to push the narrative of this is a groundbreaking technology, as opposed to this technology just exists in everything you do. That's why you need to be aware of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's especially with something like blockchain. I mean, like you say, I mean, there's lots of Web 2 technologies and databases. Why don't you just use that? But again, the problem is that most people put the blockchain in front of the the reason why, and then sell that as the reason that this product or solution should exist.
We're solving this with blockchain rather than we are solving this. And by the way, it happens to have been built on the blockchain.
Yeah. The other thing as well is that blockchain can exist without crypto. And so, it'd be interesting to see what your previous guest said about if they touched upon that, because, there's Hyperledger and there's other blockchain solutions that exist that don't require any form of crypto whatsoever. Because again, it was supposed to be an infrastructure layer. And of course, unfortunately, it just meant that people built, layer one protocols and then launched it with a token that obviously meant that they had some kind of financial incentivization to get involved, which was purely speculative.
Yeah. Well, that was his argument, essentially. Yeah.
Well, which is true. I mean, I think what is there? Who was it? CoinGecko or whatever is trying to get rid of 10,000 shitcoins at the moment off their exchanges. Because they're just nonsense.
Well, there's apparently 20. So the way he put it very simply was there are 25,000 other coins on whichever Coinbase or which I can't remember which exchange he mentioned, but he goes, number 6 on that is Dogecoin, which was literally a joke coin. And the top 10,000, if you take the market cap of the top 10,000, it doesn't even reach the market cap of Bitcoin. So they are very specifically Bitcoin focused. And yeah, his thesis is that all crypto other than Bitcoin goes to zero and has no value. That, I mean, which I'm sure there will be people, raising their arms up and would love to debate him on it. But that's the position that layers of undertaking.
Why did you set up your process like that? What and if you could explain your process, how does it work? Why did you set it up like that? And what benefits do you think it provides to your overall kind of investment framework?
So I think you retweeted someone else's post, if I remember correctly,
that might be
said pitch decks get meetings and founders get funded. Yeah. And it's a truism. Very true. But actually, the reason someone's tweeted that is because those two things are quite different, right? It wouldn't be an interesting tweet if, actually the difference between the skill set for a pitch deck or the skill set for a founder were very similar. If they were, that would be a boring tweet.
Yeah.
It's only interesting because those two things are not entirely inconsistent, but still quite different.
It's a snappy enough line that people get it, but actually when you think about it for a second, well, yeah, to your point, you can now design using AI a good looking enough pitch deck, but can you design a good looking enough founder, right?
But even without the AI, it's an interesting tweet only because those two things are so different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so what that means is it's actually not a good filter, right? It's not the best filter that you can have. The reason pitch decks exist is because you do see a lot of things. You can't meet everybody. And therefore you go, I have to have a filter of some sort. And it is the de facto standard in the industry that pitch decks are the thing.
I just, at a personal level, I find pitch decks massively frustrating.
So there is a 100% a skill set to go and produce good produce good pitch decks. And when something's de facto standard, in practice, what that means is even if it's not quite right, it's not going to change because it is the thing that's largely frictionless. Once you've done it once, you can send it to everybody.
Yeah.
However, I have introduced some friction, right? And so what I've done is gone, I don't believe that's a good thing. I don't believe that's a good filter. I am looking to both understand something about the business, but as importantly, understand something about the founder. And I think that is the piece that's missing from a pitch deck. And so what I ask for is a short, no more than 3-minute video of why you should invest. And so then I get to hear something about the business, but most importantly, I get to hear the founder speaking and how they talk about the business. And you get a feel for the founder strength very, very quickly. What that means is now your filter is actually much more closely correlated with what you're looking for when you invest. And that's why I do things that way rather than use it. Now, it does introduce some friction. There may be some people who go, actually, I don't want to do that and go through that process. And that is something that
and presumably potentially also a little bit of bias as well, right? Because
so I think the bias is towards people that actually have the skill to do a good video.
Yeah.
We can talk about other forms of bias if you like after, but the bias I'm looking for is towards people who are good at doing those things. And actually, one of the most important skills for a founder is sales.
Sales, yeah.
And that is quite closely correlated with the ability to actually knock out reasonably quickly a good video pitch. Or you can feel that skill, that kind of sales skill. Those sorts of people will find it much easier to speak into camera and to record something like that. I can see you look like you disagree.
No, I don't disagree. I was actually just trying to think about how long it took me to record that video. I think I gave it a good few tries. And I'm someone who typically doesn't script. I think I did somewhat script the pitch video that I did. And I mean, I got through it, I think, in half an hour ultimately or something. But I think what was, for me, from my perspective, I found it actually refreshing because, yes, it wasn't a pitch. It wasn't a deck. And I think decks for me can be confounding because they either provide way too much information or not enough information.